Rosewood Audio presents Murder at Birdland, an audio novel narrated by its author, Mike Steinell. Murder at Birdland is a work of fiction loosely inspired by the lives and experiences of jazz musicians in the late 1940s who performed in and around 52nd Street in New York City. All names, places, and incidents depicted in this novel are products of the author's imagination. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events is purely coincidental. And now, Episode 2 of Murder at Birdland.
Chapter 3. The Funeral. Robert Spencer died on November 2nd, 2001, a Friday, just 1 month shy of his 80th birthday. The prostate cancer had been diagnosed 3 years earlier, and he had received the typical treatment, which had postponed the inevitable. But eventually the cancer found his bones. In May of 1999, the doctors had given him a year, maybe more. He had proved them wrong and held on for 18 months. But they were not good months. He had pain, though he complained little, slept most of the day, and the things that had given him pleasure once, sports, history, and politics, held no interest for him in the end. The rain had continued through the night, and now as Martin drove to Morgan, it was intermittent. His thoughts bounced back and forth between the funeral he was headed to and the session with Thomas Gaylord the day before. It had disturbed him. He thought of the family photograph in the padded envelope that was now in the trunk of his car. He had taken it from Robert's study 1 week earlier, the day after Robert's death, 1 day after his first session with Thomas Gaylord. He thought of the photo booth at Fairyland Park and repeated the words of his patient. Then everything that happened before happened again. The sentence had percolated in his mind on and off throughout the morning. Its persistence was disturbing, particularly for Martin, a man who generally navigated life on an emotional plane as flat as a Kansas wheat field. Martin, for decades, had orchestrated each minute of his days and weeks into a strict routine that left no room for worry or anxiety. Everything was planned out, even down to his meals. He had perfected 5 dishes, 1 for each day of the work week, and week in, week out, the menu never varied. On Saturday, he ate leftovers, always in ample supply since he lived alone. Sunday, he went out for a late lunch, then had popcorn and an apple while he watched 60 Minutes. In the evenings after each meal, Martin would clean the kitchen with the diligence of a housemaid. He hated any mess or anything out of order. Once everything was in its place, he would enjoy a Doers on Ice and, in a routine as regimented as the rest of his life, turn to his real loves, the piano and jazz music. Over the decades, Martin had developed skill on the piano that far exceeded being accomplished. In truth, his artistry was nothing short of brilliant, but it went largely unrecognized in sleepy Topeka, Kansas. Martin was a friendly man, but for the most part friendless. He had never been married, never been in love, and for all practical purposes never dated. He had been pursued more than a few times by women who deemed him a good catch, for Martin was by all standards a handsome man with a good job and a doctor after all. At 51, he had a full head of hair that was just beginning to gray at the temples. His chin was strong and his nose aquiline. Although he had never spent a minute in the gym, his slightly shorter than average frame was trim, sturdy, and projected an air of health and vigor. His eyes were soft and sympathetic, and when he smiled it was warm but not exuberant. He enjoyed and recognized humor, but seldom laughed. He was just a peculiar man. The few friends that Martin had were the musicians with whom he played jazz. For 20 years, on the first Monday of each month, he had rehearsed with the Topeka Jazz Workshop. During those years, the workshop rhythm section had consisted of Martin on piano, Grady Jackson on bass, and Bob Shepard on drums. The trio did not only play as part of the workshop, but occasionally for wedding receptions, anniversaries, birthday parties, and corporate events. Grady was African American in his late 70s, but still the picture of health. He had played on the road in his youth before working for the Postal Service. He was a fine bassist. Bob was slightly younger and had been a high school band director in Topeka for 40 years. His drumming wasn't the flashiest, and he didn't play the hippest new beats, but he swung hard. Grady, Bob, and Martin had shared many moments, and although Martin knew very little of their lives outside of music, there was an artistic intimacy between them that ran deep. So in many ways, Grady and Bob were Martin's closest friends. In truth, his only friends. They were part of the handful in Topeka, Kansas, that recognized the brilliance of the very quiet and unassuming Martin Spencer. Martin was looking forward to the annual Topeka Jazz Workshop Holiday Fundraiser, which was just weeks away, always the Saturday after Thanksgiving. The big band would play, which was okay, but the trio would play during cocktails and dining. Martin was excited about the gig. As he drove, the sky began to clear, and he thought of what the day would bring. A memorial service, an interment, and a reception had been set for Friday the 9th. The service would be held in the small stone Presbyterian church that sits at the corner of Elm and Lawrence in Morgan, Kansas. The church was dedicated in 1872 and built from native stone cut by Jackson Hett, an ancestor of Robert's. The exact familial connection to the Hetts Robert had recited with accuracy on many occasions, but no one, his wife Sylvia, his daughter Tamara, or his sons Martin or Wilson had ever bothered to write it down, so like so many family stories, it was taken to the grave and forgotten. The memorial was meant to be a typical Presbyterian celebration of the resurrection. As is the custom of the denomination, it should have been suitably long on Jesus and moderately short on remembrances of the deceased. Robert would, no doubt, have been agreeable to that type of service, as he was a lifelong Presbyterian and understood the tradition. Robert's youngest son, Wilson, a successful real estate broker who had lived in Montana for a decade, had a different idea. He insisted that a moment of reflection on his father's life be included. Tamara, Robert's daughter, 5 years younger than Martin, agreed. Sylvia went with the flow. Tamara spoke at suitable length about her father's life as a prominent member of the Morgan community, his term as mayor, his charitable work, membership in Kiwanis and the Chamber of Commerce, and his church work, elder, choir member, and Sunday school teacher. She read from a prepared script. Wilson, on the other hand, opted to speak off the cuff, and as usually happens when that choice is made, he went on a bit too long. His comments meandered somewhat aimlessly and were sprinkled with more I and me than we. At one point, Wilson looked out at the congregation and declared with emphasis, "My dad was—" He paused, nodding his head as he scanned the room, then added, "the greatest coach I ever had." After more nodding and more scanning, he elaborated. "8th grade Little League. I was in a terrible hitting slump. I went 0 for 9 in the first 4 games. Dad turned me around. I ended the season batting .310. He paused again. "The next fall, we worked every day after dinner until I could put a perfect spiral on that football. Coach Heaton gave me the starting job, and we won the Cottonwood Valley League that year. I know some of you out there remember that season." From there, his eulogy detoured into a rant about the dissolution of said league. Once Wilson realized that he had talked himself out on a branch and was about to saw it off behind him, he made the ill-founded choice of telling the congregation, that was already a bit fidgety, about the time he had come home drunk, puked in the bushes, and received a lecture from Robert on how to drink responsibly. Meant to be funny, he was met instead with an uncomfortable silence. When he took his seat, he said under his breath to Tammy, "Probably should have left that part out about puking in the bushes, huh?" Tammy shrugged and said softly, "You think?" Martin went next. He read Psalms 27 and a short poem by Robert Burns. "An honest man here lies at rest, the friend of man, the friend of truth, the friend of age and guide of youth. Few hearts like his with virtue warmed, few heads with knowledge so informed. If there's another world, he lives in bliss. If there is none, he made the best of this. The funeral procession traveled 7 blocks to the cemetery where the proceedings were brief. That was a blessing, for although the rain had stopped, a cold front had moved in, and gusts of wind, sharp and cold, jostled the mourners. At the reception, Martin and Tamara sat with their mother at the front of the fellowship hall, a long room in the basement of the church. The trio received condolences and quiet conversation while Wilson worked the room. As Martin watched his younger and far more gregarious brother move from table to table, renewing friendships from high school, he held no resentment for Wilson's easygoing social abilities. Instead, he observed him as a clinician might, wondering how Wilson might score on the NPI, the Narcissistic Personality Inventory. Martin's brother had never married, and it was hard to keep up with his relationships, as he seemed to have a new girlfriend every 6 months. They were usually women involved in the real estate trade, and once or twice a year Wilson would bring them to Morgan for the holidays. Martin met them all and found them beautiful, pleasant, but uninteresting. Sylvia would get excited each time, hoping that Wilson had finally found the right girl and decided to settle down. Martin's mother smiled wistfully as she watched the townsfolk enjoy the meal prepared by the ladies of the church, typical reception fare, assorted sandwiches, jello, cake, coffee, and iced tea. No one in town did a better post-memorial meal than the ladies of First Presbyterian. But even so, Sylvia's plate sat untouched in front of her. Martin studied her face and saw the trace of sadness just below the smile. He felt very close to his mother, and over the years he sensed her growing disappointment as it became more and more likely that none of her children would ever marry. Wilson would remain a confirmed bachelor with narcissistic tendencies. Tammy had yet to come out of the closet, and Martin suspected that she wouldn't while Sylvia was still alive. As for his own life, he had been the peculiar child who had become a peculiar man who had never had a girlfriend or even a real date. Martin considered the irony that he and Wilson would remain unattached, but for different reasons. Wilson's personality was too large and overt to make any room for another. Martin's was too insulated to let anyone in. It was only through music that he enjoyed anything approaching camaraderie. It didn't bother him. He was content to be a loner because he seldom felt lonely. He was just a peculiar man. After the reception, the family gathered at Sylvia's house, just a few blocks down the street from the church. The house was already full of food delivered by the steady stream of friends from the community, and once everything was more or less organized, Wilson and Tamara left for Wichita. Wilson was flying out that evening. As they watched them leave, Martin suggested that Sylvia take a nap. Mom, it's been a big day. I bet you're exhausted. Lie down for a bit. We can have some supper later. I'll be staying over for at least a day. Oh, that's good. I was hoping you could stay for a bit. She looked toward the front of the house. The rain had stopped, the sun had broken through, and there was a warm glow from the windows that faced the street. The two were standing in the living room. Sylvia turned to her son and said, Marty, there's something I need to tell you, something important. After we talk, I think I will take a nap. Mom, are you okay? Martin was worried about his mother's health. Oh, no, Marty, I'm fine. She moved toward the couch and patted the seat next to her. "Sit here, Marty." He sat down. She took his hand and smiled. "Marty, there's something you need to know." "Okay," he said. "Marty," she paused. "Robert loved you very much. He raised you. But he was not your biological father." "Oh. Okay." Strangely, there was a tone of relief in his mother's voice as she spoke slowly. "Your father, that is, your biological father, was a man named Anthony Costello." "Oh. Okay," Martin said softly. Who? How?" He was searching for the right question without success. Before he could find it, Sylvia interrupted. "Anthony Costello was a jazz musician, a trumpet player from Kansas City." "Okay," he said again. "You said was. Is he?" Sylvia jumped in. "No, he's dead, Marty." "Oh, okay," Martin said again. "He died on November 8th, 1949 in New York City." "Wow, that was before I was—" Sylvia interrupted again. "Yes, before you were born. He never knew about you." "He died? How'd he die, Mom?" "He was murdered, Marty." Chapter 4. The Brown Box with the Checkered Top. "Murdered?" Martin asked as if he hadn't heard his mother correctly. "Yes, Marty." "New York City? Who? Why?" The questions came quickly. Sylvia had been holding his hand. Now she put her other hand on top of his and said, "I know, Marty, it's a lot. I'm sorry, but I wanted you to know. I'll explain it all, at least everything that I can explain. First, I want you to go to the hall closet. On the shelf in the back, there's a small brown box. Get it down and bring it here. It's in the back. The lid has a checkered pattern. It's a brown box with a checkered top." With the box on the coffee table, she turned to her son and began slowly. "Marty, you must know that Robert loved you very much, just as much as he loved your brother and your sister. You were his son. He was your father." "Okay, I mean, of course, Mom, I know that." Sylvia continued. "Robert and I had a very good marriage. It was a good partnership. We disagreed on very little, but on this one thing we did disagree. I always thought he was wrong. He didn't want you to know, you see. I respected that, but now he's gone." She raised her head and looked into the room. "Marty, Robert was a lovely man, a very forgiving man." She turned toward her son. "Robert married me when I was already 2 months pregnant with you." She paused, smiled, and studied her son's face. "Oh, I see." Martin looked at the floor as suddenly things began falling into place. Things he had felt more than thought for most of his life. Thoughts he had considered, then discarded, thinking they served no use. Now they flooded his mind. Robert was over 6 feet, athletic, bald by 30. Martin was 5'7", never showed any interest or aptitude for sports, and even at 51 had a thick head of hair. Tamara and Wilson were tall. Both had excelled in sports. She played volleyball in college. He was a standout in baseball, football, and track. Martin was studious and played the piano. Neither of his siblings had any interest in music. In fact, they were all but tone deaf. In church they made a good effort on the hymns, but the general effect was so brutally out of tune that when Martin was little, he would move to the end of the pew and put a hand over one ear. Wilson and Tammy were outgoing and made friends easily. Martin's life had been a solitary one that included very little beyond his work and his music. As he sat with his mother, the two looking at the brown box with the checkered top, he thought about all the times he had felt out of place in the Spencer family. There was a long pause. "I have a picture of Anthony Costello," Sylvia said as she removed a cardboard folio from the brown box. On the front was a name and an address. Tootie's Mayfair, 40 Highway and City Limits, Kansas City. She opened it carefully. It contained a photograph of her couple, herself and a young man sitting behind a table in a nightclub. Martin leaned in to look more closely, but did not pick up the photo. Sylvia pointed to the man in the picture. "That's Anthony Costello. This was taken at a jazz club called Tootie's Mayfair in Kansas City. He took me there a few times." Martin studied the picture as his mind raced. He leaned forward to look at it better. The couple was smiling, their heads tilted together the way couples often pose. The man had a full head of hair, jet black, a square jaw, and friendly eyes. Martin noticed the resemblance immediately, but didn't dwell on it. Instead, he stared at the girl, his mother. From a time for which he had no recollection, he had never seen any photos of his mother at this age, probably 23 or 24. "Tony was from Kansas City. He was a musician, a trumpeter. He'd been a musician in the war, a Navy musician stationed in Los Angeles. He returned to Kansas City when he was discharged, and we met at a dance where he was playing. Tony was a terrific talent. That's where you get yours, Martin, your musical talent. From Anthony Costello, your father." She looked at the photo. "The club was out in the country a bit. We drove there in a big car. It was a special night because we heard Charlie Parker that evening. There was a photographer who was also the bouncer, I think, because he was very big. He took the photo, and Tony bought two, one for me and one for him." Martin shook his head. "Wait," he squinted. "You heard Bird?" "Bird?" she asked. "Yeah, Charlie Parker's nickname was Bird, or Yardbird." The two stared at the photo. "Tony was a very good musician. Played on the road with different bands." She pointed to the picture again. "This was just after we met. I was in nursing school in Kansas City. We met at a dance where he was playing. He was very sweet and polite. We went out the next day to an Italian restaurant. I think it was owned by someone in this family. He had a very big family." A frown crept over her face. "We never talked about his family, but I found out later they were involved in some shady stuff, in Kansas City. When he went on the road with Charlie Barnett, he began using a stage name, Tony Martin." Martin looked at the photo and asked, "When was this taken?" "I'm not sure exactly. It was in the summer, probably August, in 1949. He left to go on the road in late September, so it was taken just a few months before he was murdered," Martin said, finishing her sentence. "Mom, why? Who? I don't understand." Martin's mind was a blur. "I'll try to explain." She removed a manila envelope from the box. "I got this in the mail while I was still in nursing school. I had no idea why until I saw what was in it." From the envelope she removed a document and handed it to Martin. It was 2 worn and yellowed pages stapled together, folded in half, with a coffee stain on the bottom of the first page. Much of the print was faded, but Martin could tell immediately what it was, a police report. He scanned it quickly, long enough to find the key passage, and read it softly. "The victim pronounced dead at the scene has been identified as Anthony Costello. an entertainer, also known as Tony Martin, shot twice in front of 1678 Broadway by a lone gunman. That's how I found out, from the report. It was a shock, Marty. Sylvia looked at the floor and shook her head back and forth. It still is, in a way. She took a breath. So someone sent me this envelope with the report and these. She emptied the remaining contents onto a table, a cardboard folio from another nightclub, and letters. The name and address on the folio, the Three Deuces, 72 West 52nd Street, caught Martin's eye. I know about this club, the Three Deuces. It was famous. Sylvia opened the folio, removed 3 photos, and placed them on the coffee table. I think these were taken around the time he was killed. She lifted one up. This may have been taken the night he was killed. She turned it over to show Martin the date written on the back of it, 11/8/49. It was a black and white photo of 3 men and a woman, well dressed and smiling, clustered at a small table in a nightclub. Behind the group was a piano and a drum set. Standing next to Tony Martin is saxophone star Charlie Parker. Tony is smiling broadly and looking at Bird rather than the photographer. My God, that's Bird with my... Martin's voice grew softer. My father. My father's standing next to Charlie Parker. Who were the other people, Mom? I don't know. Sylvia looked at the photo with sadness. She turned the folio over and pointed to the name and the address. I think this club was just a few blocks from where Tony was shot. That was outside a club called Birdland. It's famous, I think. You've probably heard of it. I have, Martin said. Sylvia spread the photos out on the coffee table. There are 2 more. This one taken outside the same club. You can see the sign there advertising Charlie Parker. Then there's this one here. She pointed to 2 men standing in front of a restaurant. That's Tony for sure, and I think that might be his younger brother. I think they're in front of the 21 Club, a famous restaurant in New York. The man wearing the hat is Tony's brother. Was Tony's brother. I don't think he's still alive. Mom, I know about all these places, Birdland, the Three Deuces, the 21 Club. I've been reading a book about them. They were on or about 52nd Street in New York. They called it Swing Street because of all the jazz clubs. The 2 looked at the photos in silence for a moment. Mom, when did you get these? And who sent them? I don't know who sent them, Marty. It just came in the mail. She leaned in to read the date on the canceled stamp. The envelope was mailed from New York on November 13th, 1949. And you have no idea who might have sent them. Marty, it scared me. I didn't know what to do at first. I went to his parents' house. It was a big fancy house in the Mission area. It was very strange. There was a man with a gun at the door, and that scared me. I almost left right then, but they let me in when I told them I was a friend of Tony's and wanted to talk to his parents. The father was gone, so they took me to the kitchen. His mother sat at a table watching cooks prepare some food. She shooed them out once I mentioned Tony's name. She seemed frightened. It was so strange. I offered my condolences and asked if they'd had any word from New York, from the police, as to who had shot him. What did she say? What did she do? She yelled for the man with the gun. She told him I was leaving and ordered him to see me out. Then she said, "My son is dead. It's been done. But he's not part of the family anymore. Don't come here again." I wanted to give them the police report, but when she said it's been done, it made me think that the family knew more about how he died. That's when I began to doing some digging into the Costello family. And? Martin asked. Marty, the Costellos were what they call a crime family, organized crime, in Kansas City for decades, going back into the 30s. It was a week after that conversation with his mother that I discovered I was pregnant. Pregnant with you. Oh, okay, I see. That must have been. Before he could finish, Sylvia interrupted. It was all very frightening. Tony dead, me pregnant, not knowing what to do next. I did call the number on the police report and asked for the detective who was investigating. It was a man named Murphy. I remember the name for some reason. He told me the investigation was ongoing and he couldn't talk about it. I never called back. I probably should have, but I didn't. I was pregnant and frightened. That's when I decided to move back to Morgan. A day later, his trumpet arrived in the mail. His trumpet? Martin asked. Yes. It's in the closet. I kept it. All these years, Martin said sadly, and you have no idea who might have sent all this to you. The police report, the photos, the trumpet. And the letters, Sylvia added. The letters? Martin asked. Yes, my letters to him and this one. She handed him a folded piece of paper. It's a letter he had started to write but never finished. Martin unfolded the page and with a quick glance noticed the heading of the stationery. Dunham Hotel, West 44th Street, New York City. Martin started reading while his mother looked out the window. He began silently, but Sylvia jumped in. Marty, read it out loud. Read it to me. The letter talked about the string of one-nighters with the Barnett Band that had ended in New York City and that Tony had saved enough from the tour to finance a few months at the Dunham Hotel while he looked for musical work. The Dunham was a favorite of jazz men in the 40s because of its proximity to the clubs on 52nd Street. There was a mention of an audition at Roseland, a dance hall. He described it as corny but steady work. He talked of a city buzzing with music and how exciting it was to be part of it. He had seen Charlie Parker in the hotel lobby and had been invited to sit in at the Three Deuces. He also mentioned that he might soon return to Kansas City briefly to sort out some family business. He closed with, I can't wait to see you, Syl. Thinking of you all the time. We'll write more tomorrow. Right now I need to warm up, meeting some friends for the Barnett Band at the Deuces later. The letter ended abruptly. There was no closing. It hadn't been finished. Sylvia took a deep breath and smiled at Martin. That was your father, Martin, living in New York City, staying at the same hotel as Charlie Parker. After a light dinner of leftovers from the memorial and the condolence baskets, Sylvia excused herself and went to bed. Martin took the brown box with the checkered top and set it on the coffee table in front of the sofa. He unwrapped the letters that were bound with a red ribbon, Tony's letters to Sylvia. He began reading, and as he did, he wept.
You've been listening to Murder at Birdland, an audio novel. To learn more about the author and the story behind the music, visit murderatbirdland.com or mikesteinell.com.